On March 3, 2023, Latavia McGee traveled from South Carolina to Mexico seeking to get a plastic surgery procedure on the cheap. 3 others accompanied her on the trip for one reason or another, but most likely because they reasoned it would be safer to travel to Mexico in a group. The 3 included Shade Woodard, Zindel Brown, and Eric James Williams. Despite raging cartel wars, Mexico has become popular with cosmetic surgery patients because it offers both tummy tucks and liposuction procedures that tend to be cheaper than those offered in Canada or the United States. Tijuana, for example, is consistently one of the world's top 3 medical tourism destinations year after year. While some might claim that Mexico is not as dangerous as the media sets it out to be, one should not forget that cartels virtually run the country. Most cartel members live based on a shot first, ask questions later policy, which leads to many innocents getting caught in the middle. Unfortunately for the group of 4, their seemingly innocuous trip to Mexico turned into a nightmare, not long after crossing the border when a shootout erupted with them caught right in the middle. For reasons unknown, Latavia and the 3 others were taken hostage and subsequently kidnapped, even though they had nothing whatsoever to do with the shootout. Shocking video of the abduction shows several gunmen in bulletproof vests ambushing the white minivan with North Carolina license plates the group was traveling in, before forcing them into the back of a pickup truck. Tamaulipas State Chief Prosecutor Irving Barrios said authorities believe that it was confusion, not a direct attack. Matamoros' reputation for gun violence amid cartel wars had led to initial speculation that the abduction was drug-related, but a source close to the investigation told the Dallas Morning News the kidnapping may have been a case of mistaken identity. The 4 tourists were found in a shack in a rural area east of Matamoros called Ejido Tecolote on the way to the Gulf Coast, known as Baghdad Beach, a moniker that should give most tourists a second thought. And living up to its name, gunfights reportedly became so fierce following the kidnapping that the U.S. consulate issued an alert. So, you may be wondering how this all ties into narco-sacrificial killings. Well, it does not, except for the fact that this was not the first time American tourists have been kidnapped and killed by cartel members in Matamoros. Matamoros sits on the southern bank of the Rio Grande, directly across the border from Brownsville, Texas. Both border cities sit so close to one another that they are referred to as the Matamoros-Brownsville metropolitan area. With its proximity to the Texas border, it's no surprise that there is a long history of cartel violence in the area. Things have gotten so bad in recent years that it has earned a reputation for being ground zero, as various cartels and drug gangs compete for supremacy. However, one of the most notorious narcos to have contributed to Matamoros' deadly reputation was technically an American citizen. On November 1, 1962, Adolfo de Jesús Constanzo was born in Miami, Florida, to a Cuban immigrant named Delia Aurora Gonzalez. At the time of his birth, Delia was only 15 years old. It is unknown what life in the United States was like for Delia and Adolfo. But after her first husband passed away, they both moved to San Juan, Puerto Rico, where she remarried. Adolfo was baptized a Catholic and served the church as an altar boy, appearing to accept the standard tenets of the Roman faith. He was 10 years old when the family moved back to Miami, and his stepfather died a year later, leaving Adolfo and his mother financially well off. By that time, neighbors in Little Havana had noticed something odd about Delia Constanzo and her son. Some said the woman was a witch, and those who angered her were likely to discover headless goats or chickens on their doorsteps in the morning. Adolfo's mother had introduced him to the Santeria cult around age 9, with side trips from Puerto Rico to Haiti for instruction in voodoo. But there were still more secrets to be learned, and in 1976 he was apprenticed to a practitioner of Palo Mayamba. His occult godfather was already rich from working with local drug dealers, and he imparted a philosophy that would follow Adolfo to his grave.
Let the non-believers kill themselves with drugs, and we will profit from their foolishness.
Around the same time, Constanzo's mother recalls that her oldest son began displaying psychic powers, scanning the future to predict such events as the 1981 shooting of President Ronald Reagan. Be that as it may, Adolfo had problems foretelling his future, including 2 1981 arrests for shoplifting, one involving the theft of a chainsaw. On the side, he had also begun to display bisexual inclinations, with a strong preference for male lovers. A modeling assignment took the handsome young sorcerer to Mexico City in 1983, and he spent his free time telling fortunes with tarot cards in the city's infamous Zona Rosa. Before returning to Miami, Adolfo collected his first Mexican disciples, including Martin Quintana, homosexual psychic George Montes, and Omar Oria, who obsessed with the occult from age 15. In short order, Constanzo seduced both a young Latino Rodriguez and Oria, claiming one as his man and the other as his woman, depending on Adolfo's romantic whim. In mid-1984, Constanzo moved to Mexico City full-time, seeking what his mother called new horizons. He shared quarters with Quintana and Oria in a strange menage, a trois collecting other followers as his magic reputation spread throughout the city. It was said that Constanzo could read the future, and he also offered limpias, or ritual cleansings, for those who felt they had been cursed by enemies. Of course, it all cost money, and Constanzo's journals, recovered after his death, document 31 regular customers, some paying up to $4,500 for a single ceremony. Adolfo established a menu for sacrificial beasts, with roosters going for $6 a head, goats for $30, boa constrictors at $450, adult zebras for $1,100, and African lion cubs listed at $3,100 each. True to the teachings of his Florida mentor, Constanzo went out of his way to charm wealthy drug dealers, helping them schedule shipments and meetings based on his predictions. For a price, he offered magic that would make dealers and their hitmen invisible to police, bulletproof against their enemies. It was all nonsense, of course, but smugglers drawn from Mexican peasant stock, with a background in witchery, were strongly inclined to believe. According to Constanzo ledgers, one dealer in Mexico City paid him $40,000 for magical services rendered over 3 years. At those rates, the customers demanded a show, and Constanzo recognized the folly of disappointing men who carried Uzi submachine guns in their armor-plated limousines. Strong medicine required first-rate ingredients, and Adolfo was rolling by mid-1985, when he and 3 of his disciples raided a Mexico City graveyard for human bones to start his own ganga, the traditional cauldron of blood, employ practitioners of Palo. The rituals and air of mystery surrounding Constanzo were powerful enough to lure a cross-section of Mexican society, with his clique of disciples including a physician, a real estate speculator, fashion models, and several transvestite nightclub performers. At first glance, the most peculiar aspect of Constanzo's new career was the appeal he seemed to have for ranking law enforcement officers. At least 4 members of the federal judicial police joined the Constanzo cult in Mexico City. One of them, Salvador Garcia, was a commander in charge of narcotics investigations. Another, Florentino Ventura, retired from the federal to lead the Mexican branch of Interpol. In November 1989, Constanzo sacrificed disciple George Gomez, accused of snorting cocaine in direct violation of El Padrino's ban on drug use. A month later, Adolfo's ties with the Hernandez family were cemented with the initiation of Ovidio Hernandez as a full-fledged cultist, complete with ritual bloodletting and prayers to the Nyanganga. Human sacrifice can also have its practical side, as when competing smuggler Ezequiel Luna was tortured to death at Rancho Santa Elena on February 14, 1989, and 2 other dealers named Ruben Garza and Ernesto Diaz wandered into the ceremony uninvited and promptly ended up on the menu. This helped thin the competition, and he didn't even have to risk kidnapping them. Of course, being an utter psychopath meant that Adolfo sometimes demanded spur-of-the-moment sacrifices, oftentimes without rhyme or reason. When he demanded fresh meat on February 25th, Ovidio Hernandez gladly joined the hunting party, picking off his 14-year-old cousin, Jose Garcia, in the heat of the moment. On March 13, 1989, Adolfo sacrificed yet another victim at the ranch, but was disappointed when his prey did not scream and plead for mercy. Disgruntled, he ordered a quote-unquote Anglo for the next ritual, and his minions fanned out with their noses to the ground, abducting 21-year-old Mark Kilroy outside a Matamoros saloon. The sacrifice went well enough, followed 2 weeks later by the butchery of Sara Aldrete's old boyfriend, Gilberto Sosa. But Kilroy's disappearance marked the beginning of the end for Constanzo's homicidal family. A popular pre-med student from Texas, Mark Kilroy was not some peasant, transvestite, something frowned upon in the heavily Catholic country, or small-time pusher, who could disappear without a trace or an investigation into his fate. With family members and Texas politicians turning up the heat, the search for Kilroy rapidly assumed the trappings of an international incident. But it would be Adolfo's disciples who destroyed him in the end. By late March 1989, Mexican authorities were busy with one of their periodic anti-drug campaigns, erecting roadblocks on a whim and sweeping the border districts for smugglers. On April 1st, an ex-cop turned gangster was sacrificed at the ranch, and the spiritual message Adolfo received was optimistic enough for his troops to move a half-ton of marijuana across the border 7 nights later. And then the supposed magic started to unravel. On April 9th, returning from a meeting with Adolfo in Brownsville, one of his cultists drove past a roadblock set up by the police without stopping, ignoring the cars that set off in hot pursuit. He believed El Padrino's claim of invisibility, and he seemed surprised when officers trailed him to his destination in Matamoros. Even so, the smuggler was arrogant, inviting police to shoot him, since the bullets would merely bounce off. Instead, the police arrested him, along with cult member David Martinez, and drove the pair back to Rancho Santa Elena, where a preliminary search turned up marijuana and weapons. 2 more disciples stumbled into the net while police were on hand, and all 4 prisoners were interrogated through the evening, revealing their tales of black magic, torture, and human sacrifice with a perverse kind of pride. The next morning, police returned to the ranch in force, discovering the foul-smelling shed where Adolfo kept his enganga, brimming with blood, spiders, scorpions, a dead black cat, a turtle shell, various bones, deer antlers, and a human brain. Captive cult members directed searchers to Adolfo's private cemetery, and excavation began, revealing 15 mutilated corpses by April 16th. In addition to Mark Kilroy and other known victims, the body count included 2 renegade federal narcotics officers, along with 3 men who were never identified. The hunt for Adolfo was on, and police raided his luxury home located outside Mexico City on April 17th, discovering stockpiles of gay pornography and a hidden ritual chamber. The discoveries at Rancho Santa Elena made international headlines, and sightings of Adolfo were reported as far away as Chicago, but in fact, he had already returned to Mexico City, hiding out in a small apartment with Sara Aldrete and 3 other disciples. On May 2nd, thinking to save herself, Sara tossed a note out the window. It read,
Por favor llame a la policía judicial. Diles que en este edificio están los que buscan. Dales la dirección, 4º piso. Dígales que una mujer está secuestrada. Ruego por esto porque lo que más quiero es hablar, o van a matar a la niña.
Passerby found the note and kept it to himself, believing it to be someone's lame attempt at humor. On May 6th, neighbors called the police to complain of a loud, vulgar argument in Adolfo's apartment. Some say, accompanied by gunshots. As officers arrived on the scene, Adolfo opened fire with an Uzi touching off a 45-minute battle in which, miraculously, only 1 policeman was wounded. When Adolfo realized that escape was impossible, he handed his weapon to a cultist, who was a professional hitman nicknamed El Doobie, with bizarre new orders. As El Doobie recalls the scene, Adolfo told him to kill him and Martin. He told Adolfo he could not do it. Adolfo hit the hitman in the face and threatened him that everything would go bad for him in hell. Then he hugged Martin, and the hitman stood in front of them and shot them with the machine gun. Adolfo and Quintana were dead when police stormed the apartment, arresting El Dubi and Sara. In the aftermath, 14 cultists were indicted on various charges, including multiple murders, weapons and narcotics violations, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. In August 1990, El Dubi was convicted of killing Adolfo and Quintana and earned himself a 30-year prison term. Cultists Juan Fragosa and Gorge Montes were both convicted in the Ramon Esquivel murder and sentenced to 35 years each. Omar Orea, convicted in the same case, died of AIDS before he could be sentenced. Sara was acquitted of Adolfo's murder but sentenced to a 6-year term for criminal association. She was nearing the end of that sentence in 1994 when her long-delayed trial on multiple murder charges brought another conviction and a 60-year prison term. Police in Mexico are still uncertain of Adolfo's final body count, with some officers trying to clear every ritualistic murder on the books by posthumously blaming Adolfo. On the other hand, in June 1989, Martin Quintana's sister told police that Adolfo's first madrina was still at large, practicing her blood magic somewhere else in Mexico. And from jail, before he died, Omar Orea said,
I do not think that the religion will end with us because it has a lot of people in it. They have found a temple in Monterrey that is not even related to us. It will continue